Welcome to this first episode of the CPO Perspective, and I am delighted to welcome my first guest, Rajbinder Kaur. Rajbinder, do you want to introduce yourself and just where are you at the moment?
Yes, thank you, Richard. So I lead procurement across multi-sites organisation within the further education,
Right.
which means operating across multiple decision centres, competing priorities and fragmented demand. So my focus really is on how procurement can move beyond execution into shaping decisions, aligning stakeholders, managing complexity and driving better organisational outcomes.
And is that public sector education, private sector education, or public sector? Right. Okay. Well, look, the first question, and it's only because I'm genuinely fascinated how people arrive at where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Did you start life imagining that you were going to be a head of procurement, or how did you end up where you are today?
No, not really. So, which I think is quite common in this profession. So I graduated in law and then I moved into a finance role. And from there, I started a junior buyer role for a global beauty giant, which gave me the exposure into key capability, policy, commercial thinking, etc. So that's where I started. And from there, so it was a shift from private sector to public sector. What drew me into procurement was the ability to operate at the intersection of strategy and execution. It allowed me to apply my legal learning and knowledge as well, where decisions actually translate into the real world outcomes. So over time, I have moved into more complex environments, particularly multi-site operations as now, where the challenge isn't just sourcing, it's more aligning, fragmented decision making into something more effective.
So you've gone from law to finance to procurement, which kind of means you've got every base covered.
We can put it that way, yes.
Yeah, perfect. Well, there we go. All right. So, you're now, as you say, head of procurement, public sector, multiple sites, and obviously there's not much going on in the world right now that affects procurement. As you sit at your desk on a Monday morning, what's in your mind? What is it that's either bothering you or you're thinking about, or where's your focus? I mean, what's your take on leading a procurement function at the moment?
That's a very good question. So the main thing for me on my mind is how procurement needs to evolve from more a transactional function into a discipline that structures decision making in increasingly complex organizations. So I see it as a 3-pillar structure. Procurement as a decision architecture. So the biggest issue that I see personally isn't procurement capability, it's decision making. I think we touched upon this before as well. So procurement sits at the intersection of cost, risk, and stakeholder priorities. And its real role is to structure those decisions effectively. Most organizations don't have procurement problem, they have a decision problem.
And just to explore that, is the decision problem that procurement gives great advice and stakeholders ignore it, or is it that stakeholders aren't confident in the advice, or is it something different from your point of view?
So I was going on to that one. So that takes me to the next point. So I think that's because it's what one wants to highlight is the biggest missed opportunity is timing. So, procurement is still brought in too late, when decisions are already made. So that's where I think the issue is.
So we're playing catch up.
We're playing catch up. And the real shift is upstream. So really getting involved earlier to shape demand, influence outcomes, and drive that value before it's locked in. So, if procurement is only involved at the point of purchase, most of the leverage is already done. Exactly.
So what is it that in your organization, what is it that you think is stopping that upstream? Is it, the old fashioned stakeholders don't want procurement anywhere near it, so they do everything themselves and then get us in at the last minute? Or is it, again, is it something else that you see?
It's mainly the standard processing that we follow. So, we need to make it a little more flexible. it's more suitable for the stakeholders. So, such as in my organisation, complexities is often seen as a problem, but it is an asset if structured properly. So if you're dealing with decentralised insight, local intelligence and varied demand, but without coordination, that then becomes inefficiency. So the goal isn't really, centralisation for control, it's more for impact.
That's interesting, because what I observe is that, operational stakeholders, the minute they see a procurement process, they tend to run a mile and imagine it's just there because we can't help ourselves, and we want to. But you're actually suggesting something different. It's process to actually drive efficiency of getting from stakeholder requirement to outcome, right?
Exactly. So focus less on the process, but more on how decisions are really made.
Right.
The strongest procurement leaders aren't just good at sourcing. I mean, we've been there, we've done it all, but it's really understanding how the organizations think, how the stakeholders operate, and where the real influence really sits. So if we can shape the decisions early, we don't just manage the spend, we actually then get to shape the outcomes as well.
Got it. And do you think there's any particular factor that is preventing, category managers, procurement leaders in your organization, getting that, I suppose, that relationship and that involvement early in the decision making? Or is it just, just organizational, inertia? Can you see a reason in your area?
Yes, stakeholder engagement. So I think,
Right.
procurement teams functions, varying on the organisation size, it's often misunderstood. It's not just communication, it's more about alignment. So
Right.
like different stakeholders are optimizing for different things, such as finance is focused on cost, operations on speed, and leadership on risks and outcomes. So the role of procurement is to structure those competing priorities into more of a decision-making framework.
And how do you, I mean, it's that age-old thing, though. There's always the risk that procurement end up being in the
Yeah.
center of the room, being beaten up by everybody because they're trying to get stakeholders with different opinions to align. I mean, how do you tackle that in your world?
It would be more, engaging early, having more of a structure in place. It could be for contract management, which
Right.
is, quite big at the moment. So it's really engaging with your suppliers, understanding what their requirements are. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really talking, really, come and talk to us. So, we're not like just to sit in, behind the desk. So yeah, we go around, and so I
Got it.
think procurement is where strategy becomes real, because in today's environment, it just makes one of the most critical functions in any organizations. But we need to
Right.
really leave behind the old ways of doing procurement.
So I'm going to throw you well, I never throw anyone a tricky question, but if you look back and think about, when you made that transition into procurement as a junior buyer, and you look at your junior buyers now, if you still have them, what how different is their world from the world you were in when you were starting on the path to becoming a procurement professional?
Mm. I mean, a lot has changed since then. If I go back 10 years now, there wasn't much available in terms of, procurement training, such as
Right.
webinars is one, attending the conferences. With SIPs, we've got, SIPs as well. So that's really helping the new junior buyers as well.
Right.
There's more through organisation support. I mean, through my organisation, I develop and do training for the team. But yeah, I think what the mistake that most organisations make is with engaging stakeholders, too late, when positions are already fixed. So at that point,
Right.
you're negotiating preferences and not shaping decisions. And that's just the way how things have always been done. So it's really moving away and try and be more, you know, something new.
Got it. Um, of course, we've got to talk about AI.
Mhm.
As you say, we both attend a lot of conferences. We hear a lot
Yes.
of talk. It's impossible to have a conversation about procurement without AI popping in at
Mm.
least every other sentence. depending on who you talk to, AI is going to replace 70% of the teams of the future, or AI is not going to do any such thing. Where do you see AI contributing in your world, or maybe more importantly, where do you think AI shouldn't play a part in the way that we deliver outcomes for stakeholders?
AI is developing, and it's always evolving and changing, and it's really adapting to what we need it for. I think for purchase to pay, that it sits very well within that area. Within procurement, it probably be more with the drafting of tender documentation, I'd say. But whereas it comes to evaluation of tenders, maybe not as much, but it's really trying different, softwares available, what's out there, and to see if that meets the requirements of each different organization.
Got it. So no chance of AI replacing your team completely and doing the job for you in some automated utopia then?
Not at present as it stands now.
Oh, cool. I want to come back to, because you said you've made the transition from private sector to public sector, and I haven't done a great deal of public procurement. How different is it in your experience?
It aligns in many areas, but then it's also very different in terms of we're not, looking at the profit, we're doing cost savings. So that's the key area where it differs. And, so we're more on social value, sustainability. So it's not very much profit based.
No. And do you think, Public Procurement Act is making a difference? Has that changed it again, or is it still kind of feeding through, I guess?
I think it's still feeding through, and there's always more coming through, how it's working, what isn't. It is an opportunity for more suppliers to be involved in the decisions. It's given them the opportunity, for the small, medium enterprises. But I think it's as we go, we'll see more how it's, affecting different organizations and how everyone's adapting to it.
I couldn't help but notice you smile when I asked if it was feeding through. I mean, one of the things I think procurement is not short of at the moment is different global regulation that's appearing for us to go and think about. Again, is how are you and your team coping, even just keeping up to date with the things that we're supposed to be protecting our organizations against?
Is that in line with the new Procurement Act?
Well, new Procurement Act, environmental ESG legislation. I mean, there's European stuff which probably doesn't affect us quite as much as it did, but there's a lot of stuff that's coming in, and when we're evaluating tenders, we have to check it. I mean, do you think that's something that we do well in keeping our team up to date with it, or is it an Achilles heel that we kind of need to address, I guess?
Speaking from my own experience, so I've transitioned from local authority to higher education to further education. So I think it varies from organisation to organisation, depending on the size of the team as well and the function. How well the training and development is in terms of procurement. So that is a big, influence on the team and the team players in terms of whether it's evaluation training and the new Procurement Act training. I think that all comes together when it's we're shaping the entire function.
Got it. Well, it would be remiss if I didn't ask the question. It's if you, as you say, depending on where you work and what kind of organization they're in, is there anything which genuinely worries you at the moment? So in the ability of your procurement team to deliver value, is there anything that keeps you awake at night, or which is actually really occupying your mind?
I think it takes me back to the decision making,
right?
Which fail at the board level. So you do a tender process and everything in place. So there's a lot of work goes in procurement, for each project, or so board level decision making often fails because of not because of lack of expertise, whether it's procurement team or other colleagues, but it's because of the misalignment in incentives, the information, and the timing. So there's different elements to it. So different functions bring different perspectives, but without a structured way to align those perspectives, decisions become fragmented or then delayed.
And what, I suppose, what can we do about that? I mean, what's your approach with your team to improving that, that alignment, that engagement with the board, so that, that kind of misalignment of decision making becomes less of an issue? Is there something specific that we can do about it, or that you're doing about it?
It's just really, takes me back to the stakeholder engagement discussion. Getting the priorities right to, form a decision framework. So we are liaising with different teams and departments. So we're focused on, all the areas in terms of risk and outcomes.
Got it. So it literally is just building relationships and talking to people.
Yes.
Crikey. So what do you think is coming up next? As we look at the world at the moment, and, frankly, everything is up in the air at the minute. What do you think procurement can do to, I suppose, best prepare itself for, I suppose, just an era of constant change? How do we prepare that kind of resilience and that adaptability in our team? Is it we're just learning it on the job, or do you think that's something that we can build in through the way we develop people?
When developing people, having the market awareness, and depending on what's the requirement, also engaging with early supplier engagement, and in terms of decisions, whether they're making too early or without sufficient data or too late. So they kind of really constrain. So, it both reduces the quality of the outcome. So it's being involved and, getting involved as early as possible. So they, really focus less on the individual viewpoints and more on decision frameworks, clear objectives, defined trade-offs, and early alignment across functions. Because without that, even, good people make optimal decisions.
So look, I'm going to ask the question, and you can decide how to answer this. If you were looking back at the even younger Rajbinder, and you can decide whether you're the Rajbinder that's still in finance, or and maybe you say you don't even go into procurement at all, or the young Rajbinder in just starting out in procurement. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self about the way to approach procurement and, the challenges that come along the way?
I would definitely say focus less on the processes and more on how, decisions are made. The strongest procurement leaders, aren't just good at, at sourcing, but, we have to think how the organizations work again, how they operate. So it's more stakeholder engagement, supplier engagement, finding where the real influence sits. So, we could be doing textbook work, but that's not really going out there helping shape decisions early. So that's what I would, say, do something different. So you're not just managing the spend, but then again, you're shaping the outcomes and and minimizing risks.
I love it. It's spend less worrying about the process and the detail, and more about the business and how you fit within the business and what you're trying to deliver.
Exactly. Yes.
That's a really lovely way of putting it. Well, look, if I was going to ask, I suppose a final question, which is, hopefully we'll have an audience for the CPO perspective. If you were not just talking to your younger self, but actually talking to someone who was thinking about whether to start a career in procurement, so they're at that happy crossroads of, what do I do with my life? What would you say to them about going into a career in procurement? What's your take on it now that you've had a career in it and, succeeded and reached a senior role? What would you say to someone who was thinking about doing it? Why should they do procurement?
I mean, absolutely, it's a brilliant role to be in. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't. But always do your, research whether it's something that aligns with yourself as well. And for me, it's just, it's a challenging role. Not a, no day is the same. So, every day there's some different challenges. So I walk into the office. It's never I do the same thing the very next day. So it's really, what are you up for? You need to be more of a good communicator, able to negotiate. So really, it's all rounder, really. So it's what really ticks you to do this. So for me, it's the satisfaction of, completing a project. When I first started, being involved in low to medium risk projects, it was exciting to see, a new build going up, which you've been working behind, in the back office, and you think, wow, my work went into this. And it was quite proud moment. So I'd say definitely, explore the options, see if it aligns, with supply chain and logistics, especially where how things are going now at the moment in the world. But yeah, I think it tracks all backgrounds really, whether in law, finance. I think it's brilliant.
Do you know what? What a lovely place to finish. Procurement. It's brilliant. And I couldn't agree more. Rajbinder, thank you so much for joining us. It would be great to catch up in the future and hear how things are going. But for now, thank you for sharing, I guess, your impression of procurement and what matters. And in particular, that message that understanding the business and building relationship with stakeholders is actually really the biggest key to success, which I think is wonderful advice.
It is, yes. No, thank you, Richard. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. To you out there, there'll be future episodes, but please feel free to share what you've discovered, what you've learned, and I hope you continue to enjoy what is undoubtedly a brilliant profession. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.